Hello, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic, episode 46. Today's episode is brought to you by Buddhist teachings and mindful meditation, because today's guest is once again the great actor, Buddhist priest, and my mentor, Peter Coyote. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Classroom of Life. That is the Stand Up with Pete Dominic podcast. 3 days a week, I invite the smartest people I know or don't know on to discuss the issues and problems that we face as communities, a nation, a planet, or just on our own journey. I try to fight apathy and learn along with you. I appreciate you joining me here on the journey. Please don't forget to subscribe and give a rating to this podcast on whatever app you are listening to. And if you haven't considered a paid subscription, today is your day. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic. That's patreon.com/Pete Dominic and sign up to support this as of yet advertisement-free show. Supporting independent media is just about the most responsible thing you can do with your money to learn about these important issues that we talk about here and many others do in other places. I have recently suffered from what has been diagnosed by my primary care physician and then a neurologist and other doctor people in my life with anxiety. It's led to depressions of sorts. This last 4 or 5 weeks has been pretty great. I've figured a lot out. I've gotten a lot of help, including from today's guest, Peter Coyote, who joined me, by the way, back in episode 14. So if you like this conversation and you didn't hear that one, and even if you did, it's certainly worth listening to over and over. Maybe you're an addict or you have a chronic disease that makes your life more challenging. Perhaps you're in an abusive relationship or just unhappy in your own relationship. Maybe you're stuck in a job you hate with people you really don't like. Maybe your marriage just ended. Just got divorced. Or maybe like me, you just lost a job that you loved and the money that went along with it, the money and security that went along with it. No matter what, I'm finding out as I talk about, as I am honest about the issues I'm struggling with on my journey, I am hearing from so many of you, so many men especially, but women as well, talking about what they're struggling with. And nobody's better to talk about any of these things than with Peter Coyote, including the anxiety and fear and depression that comes along with what's happening in the world in terms of politics and national issues. We touched on that and more. Also, Peter Coyote, if you don't know, he is a very successful actor. He's had an amazing career as an actor. He's also done the voiceover for many or even most of Ken Burns' great award-winning documentaries. He is a Buddhist priest who used to listen to the old SiriusXM show and call in from time to time. And at one point, I got his email and reached out to him and found out that he was the actor, Peter Coyote. And then I invited him on to be my guest, booked guest on the show, and he became a regular, and everybody loved him. Everybody loved him on episode 14, and you are going to love him today. We talked for over an hour at his hotel in New York City, where he was to do some work here in New York, where he grew up with Ken Burns. And you got to wait till the end till I ask him about his relationship with Ken Burns. Interesting to get his take on that and the work that he's done there. But we talk about all kinds of things, and he gives me the answer to end my suffering, and maybe it'll help you with yours. All right, that was a little bit of a tease. No way to completely end suffering, but there certainly is a way to navigate it. Here now is another great conversation with my mentor, my hero, the brilliant Peter Coyote.
All right.
This is Peter Coyote.
This is Peter Dominic. We're sitting in your hotel room, and it's so great. Let me just say, now we're recording, we're starting, that usually when we talk, I think we've only met in person one time. Usually when we talk, it's remote, but there is something to be said to be in your space. I'm really happy to be in your space. You've been amazing to me, and it's so great to be sitting here with you. Thank you very much for allowing me to come by. Good to have you in New York.
I feel like we've become broadcast buddies.
I will be your broadcast buddy anytime, as much as you want to be joining me in conversation. I learned so much. The first time you were on, a lot of people really, really loved our conversation.
Oh, good.
And so I'm really happy to have you back. Is it good to be back in New York because you grew up here?
New York's fun for me for about 7-8 days, and then it starts to feel like an assault. compared to California.
Right.
I live out in the country with 2 dogs and 3 dead-end roads. But it's fun. I'm going to the theater. My son is here, so I get to see him, and I have many friends here, but I don't like to stay here long enough to see everyone.
What is it specifically? The people, the energy, the pollution, the...
No. It's just the mass of people and the mass of sort of full frontal assault energy. I mean, the thing I like about the East is that people are out front. They tell you exactly where they are, and there's no fooling around. And I wish Californians had more of that. But I've gotten lazy, and in California I can just drop all my guards and just, be like a little mammal.
You've written about and talked about your connection to nature a lot, but I don't think I've talked about it with you as much, and I wonder, it's always been something for you to be connected. You grew up you had a farm at one point growing up, spent a lot of time on a farm.
Delaware Water Gap.
And so at this point in your life, is there any way to describe what your relationship with the natural world is like, what it means to you, how you connect to it today?
Well, if you think about it, we have the idea that I'm sitting over here and you're sitting over there, and that you and I are separate, and that we're separated by this space between us. But I could also say that we're joined by this space between us. And so another way to look at the world that's equally valid. I mean, it's true. You have a sense of self. I have a sense of self. If I bang my knee, you don't feel it. But it's also simultaneously true that you and I have never for an instant been separated from oxygen, from sunlight, from water, from the microbes in the soil that grow our food, from pollinating insects, from the birds that control those insects, all the way out to the Earth's orbit in space. If we were closer to the sun, water would boil off. We wouldn't be here. If we were farther away, it would freeze. So it's equally true to say that you and I, though apparently separate, are all part of one big thing. And when you look at the world from that one big thing perspective, everything is you, not your little ego, way beyond your idea of your ego. But that bird is me, the rain is me, because I couldn't exist without it. So it's pretty hard to put into words, but when you are quiet and you just let your little ideas and your interior monologue slow down a little bit, you can actually perceive it. And so that's when I'm in nature. Nature is like the big teacher. Nature is like Buddha to me. That's the world that is self-organized. It's not organized for human reasons. Wild means self-organized. And so it means I'm out of myself and I'm in some kind of harmony with a larger plan.
Have you had epiphanies, experiences, moments that you can describe, that you can remember in nature where...
Oh, yeah. I remember the first, I must have been 5 or 6, seeing a robin for the first time. That was the first bird I recognized. And it looked like it was outlined against the sky in black ink. Like it was so vivid, it was separated from the rest of creation. And I saw that, and there was something about its vividness, and there was something about its just suchness that told me that it was alive, and it was looking at me, and I was looking at it, and we were kind of co-equals. That's not a bit tall order for a 5-year-old. But later on, I had 2 experiences. I was living in the country, and I wanted to learn how to trap. And the manager of our ranch was a game warden who had fought the egret hunters in Florida to protect birds from the Italian hatters that came down and took their feathers. And he was my hero. He was tall and handsome and really quiet and Scotch English and not like my loud, crazy Jewish family. He was like cowboy-looking kind of guy. So my dad told him to take me out and teach me to trap. And we got these traps ready, and we had gloves and things that had been laying outside all the time. We set a trap. And we came in about 2 days later, we checking the traps every day. And as I got close to the trap, there was a weasel stuck in the trap with its back legs. And it was thrashing around, and it just stopped, and it looked at me. And as clearly as you're speaking, I saw in like those red letters that go across Times Square, it said, "What are you going to do to me?" And it was so clear, I looked at Jim to see if he had heard it, and he clubbed it and killed it. And then I wasn't so sure about trapping, but he showed me how to skin it and how to make a board to stretch the skin on. And about 2 days later, we went, and there was a raven that was locked in the trap. And I said, no, let's just let it go. And he said, and the raven looked at me and said, "What are you going to do?" And he killed it before I could say anything. So I stopped trapping, but I had gotten indisputable feeling that I was dealing with an awareness that was equal to my own awareness. And I've had many experiences like that. Once I was living in my truck out in the desert. Once I grabbed a snake from under my sleeping mat, and I said to it, I said, "Listen, I'll let you go, but you have to tell me something." And I opened up my hand, and it coiled up on my hand. It was a garter snake. And it just looked me in the eye, and once again, the red letters, the teletype went across. It said, "Anger is panic." I shrugged. I said, "Thank you very much." I let it go. So I just always have believed that, if you think about a brain, our brain is a gland that produces images. And mammal brains are basically all the same. So I think that when we train a dog, we are sending an image to the dog that the dog gets, and we're attaching a word to it. And I think that any animal with a brain can basically non-verbally communicate in the same way that you look at some guy and you just know not to mess with him. Right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people see me and feel that way. A lot of very small people. They're babies.
Very protective, good instinct.
Yeah, I understand. Do you think, have you ever had or have you had many moments in nature where you were scared? By an animal or any other natural storm?
Well, I walked.
Mountain.
Gary Snyder and I walked once. We got dropped off by a bush plane in Alaska.
Should I know Gary Snyder?
Yeah, you should know Gary Snyder. I'm sorry. Gary Snyder is a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. He's one of the great thinkers and voices on the environment. And he was one of the original beat poets.
Okay.
Jack Kerouac wrote a book about him called The Dharma Bums, in which the protagonist was called Jaffe Ryder. And when I was a kid, I got interested in the beats as they were grown-ups, but they were not going for the okey doke. And so there were adult voices that were critiquing the culture and giving me articulations of my feelings and things. And one of the things they were all interested in was Buddhism. So I started reading books about Buddhism, and in short order, I was anesthetizing my friends,
About what age was that?
14, 15.
Wow.
Anesthetizing my friends, pretending to be enlightened and pretending I understood these Zen riddles and things. But Gary Snyder, I met Gary Snyder in probably 1967 or 8. And he was so compelling. First of all, he lived in Japan for 9 years in a Buddhist monastery, married a Japanese woman, read and wrote Japanese. And I thought, okay, if anybody knows about Zen, this guy does. So I made up my mind to be friends with him, and I developed a friendship, and he's a really important mentor to me. And when I was ordained as a Buddhist, normally you get this little raksu you sew. It's a little bib kind of that goes over your neck, and on the back of it, your teacher gives you a name, and he signs it. And my teacher left space so that Gary could sign it also.
Oh, wow.
So he's very central to me. So anyway, he and I were crossing the Koyukon, and we got dropped off by a bush plane, and we were going to be picked up 3 weeks later.
Wow.
Map and compass, getting to another lake. And we were in grizzly bear country. And so we were getting briefed by a ranger before we went. And I said to the ranger, well, what do we do if we see a bear? And the ranger said, well, it's really simple. You just reach into your pants and you grab some shit and you throw it at the bear. And I stepped right into it. I said, well, wait a minute, suppose there's no shit. He said,
there will be.
If there's a bear, there will be. Anyway, so when we were crossing that country and you'd go into the willow brush along the river, because I was fishing to catch fish to add to our freeze-dried guck. Yeah, that was nervous-making because you're not the top of the food chain out there.
Have you spent a lot of time way out off the grid like that? Periods of time, trips?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes. And there was also a period where I lived in my truck and I camped out and slept out maybe, 200 nights a year or something.
Why did you do that?
I lost my land base, and I was traveling often between various communes that my family called the Diggers had all up and down from the Southwest, Colorado, New Mexico, all the way up to the Oregon border. And I just like to travel and bring the news and trade, and I dug it.
So when you talk about everything being connected and there's no real space between us, I wonder how you see then the world as it is right now, and that it seems, I guess it's all based on your perception, that there's a lot of bad things happening in the world. In our country specifically, we're so divided now in a way that we never have been in my lifetime. I'd love to know what you think in terms of comparison to the 60s, and obviously you're a student of history, but it seems like we're really in conflict with each other, very much divided over the kind of the Trump cult, and I would say everybody else. I don't call it liberal and conservative, Republican and Democrat. It's just those who support this guy and somehow have been hoodwinked by him in my words. Maybe you would think differently, and the rest of us. And it seems so negative, Peter. It seems so. It very much seems like it's hard. It's going to be hard to come back from, unless there's an alien invasion that unites us. And I would argue that that's climate change that we should be united over, because it's so existential and so worldwide. But
well, I think you're right. So, God, where to start? Okay. So everything that exists right now comes from what existed just before. And everything that existed just before came from something that existed just before. So some of these problems have been here. They're just human dilemmas. America was founded in genocide. It was founded in slavery. And the karma of those acts doesn't just disappear. So the wealth that we have was based on countless murders, countless oppression of people. And that kind of preys on the conscience in a funny way of white people. And I'll tell you how I know. So there's a lot of talk, let's say, about young black men being shot by the police. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty clear that the police are employees. And if their bosses said, can't shoot black guys anymore, it would have stopped. So that hasn't been said. So then the question is, why hasn't that been said? Well, it hasn't been said because there's a huge constituency to whom that silence is actually speaking. And the speaking is, we're not going to let them get you. Because many, many white people feel, well, if I was treated like black people were treated, I would be a crazy homicidal guy. I'm not to keep the cops out there, keep them away from me. So it's this unresolved fear and guilt and anger which makes a kind of unbridgeable gulf. And white people don't understand the grace of black people. They just don't get it. Believe me, had it been my people, had it been the Jews that had been enslaved, Florida would be surrounded by nuclear submarines today. And we would be there, threatening bloody murder. So that's just one vein of this difficulty.
Yeah.
The second is...
It's a very important one unique to America.
I think it's important. I think it's overdue.
History. Yeah.
I think the 1619 Project by the New York Times is a great beginning. I think seeing so many people with diversity, but remember the flip side of it is white people feel like they're losing something. And they are. It's not the majority that they're losing. What they're losing is a kind of entitlement to do whatever they want without consequences. You can also flip it around and say you're being invited to join the human family.
Yeah, right? That's how I see it.
Right? There's a flip side to it. But you have to relax the fear before people will see that. I mean, what do you think, that black and Mexican people are going to come in and take your bed? Well, if you think that, it's because you took somebody else's bed. And you're projecting your own bestiality or your own lack of restraint on all those other people. But, so let's just freeze that for a second.
Well, I mean, I just want to say that there are people, I just was taught to, or I don't know if I was taught to, but I'm just curious about diversity. Like, I want you to come to my house and stay in my bed. Don't take it, but stay over and give me all the richness of your culture, of your heritage. Like I've always wanted to be around different people, which is why I moved out of an all, monolithic white upstate New York and moved to New York.
Me too, but there are people that are afraid of other people.
Yeah.
So that's one strain. Then let's look at from 1945 to 1973, America came closer to having a full economic democracy than any country on earth. We had something called the Treaty of Detroit, which was in force. Wages were linked to corporate profits. As corporate profits went up, wages went up, and it worked great. People had money in the bank. They bought stuff. The banks had money to loan to the factories to meet that need. And that went on until 1973, where they broke the Treaty of Detroit, they meaning the elites that kind of set policy, and they decided the real battle was fighting inflation. And this had two wings to it. The first thing they did was they froze wages. They took it out of the workers. And today's minimum wage is the same buying power as the minimum wage of 1973. So corporate profits have gone up 50, 60, production has gone up 50, 60 times. Wages have gone up for executives 700 to 800 times. Workers are still making what they made in 1973 relative. In other words, $15 an hour is $3.85 an hour, whatever it was. So suddenly, the life that everybody had won, you could graduate from school, you didn't have to go to college, you could get a job, you could support a family, the father or mother could support the family. There was no latchkey kids running around. So you had stable communities. I don't know if you ever saw that movie called Black Dahlia.
I did not, no.
Well, it was a murder mystery about a woman who was killed. It took place in Los Angeles in the 40s. And there was a great scene of Watts, which was just all little houses with backyards and barbecues and kids riding the street. It was nothing like the Compton or Watts that it is today. That's what America was like.
Right, the wealth inequality. I mean, obviously we could talk about the racial component of that even, but the wealth inequality was so much less then than it is now.
So follow me a second. So I think it was 1973. Paul Volcker was the chairman of the Fed for Jimmy Carter, and they wanted to end inflation. They wanted to send a signal to all the European banks that they were serious about it. So he raised interest rates 5 points in a single day. Well, the unintended consequence of that was the bankruptcy of about 20 million farmers who had done exactly what all the agricultural agencies told them to do. Forget your grandfather's caution, borrow money, buy this big equipment, farm fence row to fence row, the values of your land going up, you can't lose. So they lost. They couldn't meet their payments. So for every 5 farms that collapsed, you lost a local business. The leading cause of death in the 70s on the farm was suicide. By the time Clinton came in, he cut the budget for rural mental health. So from 1973 on, Reagan came in and he declared war on the unions. He fired 10,000 air traffic controllers.
Right.
The corporate sector followed him. They crushed the National Labor Relations Board. And the engine that built middle-class wealth, the unions, and gave workers a place to fight for a decent livelihood, was crushed. Went from, I don't know what it was, but it was more than 50% union membership to something like 6%. So now you've got the rural people that were abandoned. You have workers that were abandoned. And they were abandoned jointly by Republicans and Democrats. Bill Clinton turned the Democratic Party into Republican light by going after the big money. So all those Trumpers out there, all these people you want to call the deplorables or this or that, yeah, there's a number of mouth breathers and there's a number of crazies.
A lot of broken people.
But most of them are people that for the last 40 years have watched the smiling, happy news shows telling the news and realized nothing about it worked for them. Then in the 80s, they loosened up the banking rules, and you had the savings and loan scandal, which took $260 billion worth of personal savings. Then 20 years later, Clinton did it again.
Yep.
And we had
deregulated the financial industry.
Like they didn't know what was going to happen.
No, that was. I remember Senator Byron Dorgan on the Senate floor said, if we deregulate, if we get rid of these rules and break down the firewall between investment and commercial banks, in 10 years, we're going to have a disaster. And you know what? It was 11 years later, I think.
Yeah, no, he was a hero, right. Dorgan.
Yeah, you know.
Who was the guy from Texas that had Clinton's ear then?
Senator?
Yeah, I forget his name now. He's a real pissant. But anyway, so just look at the debacle from 1945 through 73. We still haven't recovered from 2008. So all of these people, what I see is they felt so hopeless and so desperate for control that they took a Hail Mary gamble on Trump, because Trump at least told the truth. He said the game's rigged, the system's rigged. I'm the only guy that can help you. But that was the lie.
Yeah.
The system was rigged.
But of course, but I mean, Bernie Sanders says that too, and so do a lot of others. I just don't understand how. I understand everything that you explained, but why him? How could you not see that he was and is a con artist?
Well,
even if some of what he's saying is true, or he's got his finger on the pulse of a certain quote forgotten Americans, why would you think he cares about you? That's the thing where
do you know anybody that has a pit bull?
I don't.
Okay, I do. Pit bulls are generally pretty nice dogs, but they've been bred to fight. They've been bred to kill. Sometimes they're trained to do that, and people bring them into their homes. What are the black and tan dogs? They're great.
The Doberman.
Dobermans. Every once in a while you read about a Doberman eating its owner, killing an old grandmother, something like that. They bring them into their homes.
Sorry for laughing.
So You see a guy, he's walking down the street, he's got a dog, it's all power, it's all muscle, and he brings it into his home. And it's a Hail Mary hope that the kid never pulls its ear one day when he's running around and the dog's in a bad mood. So people saw Trump, they knew him from television, he looked like a celebrity, he seemed to be rich and successful, and he said, I'm here for you, and he said out loud all the stuff that they knew. It's rigged this way, it's rigged that way. So they took a pass. When the New York Times had an article about 15 women they interviewed who voted for Trump, half of them were Bernie supporters who were so furious at the Democratic Party for putting their finger on the scale in the last election, they said we couldn't vote for Hillary.
Do you think Bernie Sanders could beat Donald Trump, given the fact that he says a lot of the stuff, the rigged stuff, and he's got a lot, he can't be bought. He's not as corruptible. He doesn't seem like a con man.
Here's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
Here's my one real fear.
You have fear, Peter?
Yeah. This is what I'm afraid of. Because me and my hipster progressive friends in the 60s didn't like Hubert Humphrey's position on the war in Vietnam, we laid back, we didn't support him, and we got Nixon. And because we didn't like, we weren't excited about Mondale, we laid back and we got Reagan. And what we didn't understand as young men was that everybody on the other side of the line from Richard Nixon was on our side. So, yes, there are people that want Bernie Sanders. My politics are closer to Bernie Sanders than anybody. But the people that are going to make this election live between the Appalachians and the Rockies. And unless my progressive friends and myself are willing to make common cause with those people, Trump is going to win again.
What about that school of thought that people of color and young people will come out in such numbers because Bernie Sanders will is able to charge them up? The difference between the kind of, I don't know which one is right, but the moderate candidate is more likely to bring out those people that you just described between the Appalachian and the Rockies, but the more progressive candidate is going to excite the base and people of color and young people in a way that the moderate would not.
You know, we don't have the luxury of laying back until we're excited.
I agree.
Right? We don't have it.
No.
So just consider this. Suppose America is just exhausted right now and they don't have the energy to completely take a gamble on overhauling their medical system. Right? Things go wrong. They just don't know. So suppose they were to elect Biden, who's the least interesting to me, and suppose he brings somebody younger or a woman or one of the great candidates that we have available in, it would still be so many light years ahead of where we are now. Every single candidate that's running is running to the left of Obama. Think about that. There's nobody that's not going to support fight on global warming, that's not going to support a tax on the rich, that's not going to support kind of progressive income taxes, all of them. So if we fight, I'll vote for a horse thief.
Right.
Any reasonable adult. And so what I feel we ought to do is have the battles now, go for everything you want, but when the dust settles, whoever it is, you have to fight for as if you loved them.
Agreed. I'll be there with you. Given your background, your knowledge, your experience, maybe even your reputation, your education, your credibility on so many different ideas and issues in life in general, how do you, Peter, judge or not judge, I may be guessing, somebody that you see walks into the room, that walks into a meeting, that walks in even to your home, that you know has a completely different ideological view on just about everything or any number of things than you do? Do you judge them? Do you make assumptions? Do you reject them? How do you treat people who aren't, I'm going to say, as evolved as you, aren't as enlightened as you, or just share your opinions?
You know, the best thing I learned from Zen practice is not knowing. The man who founded the monastery where I practiced, Suzuki Roshi, he wrote a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Little thin book. It's sold over 1 million copies. It's just clear and simple. What he used to say is, in the mind of an expert, there are very few possibilities. In the mind of a beginner, they're limitless. So when I meet new people, I just try to remind myself, I really don't know. Even if they're a trumper, I really don't know. One of my best friends in California is a brilliant kind of electronics wizard. And, he reads the Drudge Report, and he reads Trump, and it's all of this stuff. Well, every once in a while, we like to mix it up and fight and argue politics. But most of the time, he just lost his wife. He was trying to heal his wife with alternative medical cancers. He was dedicated to her. And you see this and you realize nobody gets through life scot-free. Nobody gets through without suffering. So everything this side of Pulse and Breath, the guy across from me is just like me. He doesn't want to die. He runs away from what he doesn't like, and he runs toward what he does like. And if you stick him, he hurts. So I try not to make ideological and political ideas more important than the flesh and blood person in front of me, because the truth is, when people are not judged, they relax. And when you're not shouting at them, they relax. And when you don't make assumptions, well, if he likes this guy, he must feel this and he must feel that. All of that is some kind of phony knowing. It's just intellect. It's just nothing. Just don't know. Just the guy that you got angry at 10 minutes later is a different person. So I find it useful to not know when I meet people, to clear my head, just do an exhale and just put my attention on it. And before I answer the phone, here I am.
You mentioned, well, then what is your relationship with ego? You're a very successful actor, but you're also a Buddhist priest. You've had a lot of experience in life, and I've learned a lot about my ego and ego in general in the past few months especially. So what about you? What is it?
Well, it's an awareness. There's no little walnut that says Pete Dominic on it that's tucked under your liver. There's no little homunculus, a little tiny Pete Dominic behind your forehead that's doing your seeing and your hearing and your feeling. But since we were little, because we have a word for you, or we have a word for self, or we have a word for me or I, little by little we start to create a solidity to it, instead of realizing it's just an awareness. And once you realize it's an awareness, you realize there's nothing between you and changing but your habits. So the trick is to realize that even though you have an awareness of being different, there's nothing fixed about it. And that's really relieving. That gives you a big field to run around in. So, yeah, my ego tells me to brush my teeth. My ego tells me dress up nice if you're going to meet your parents or something. I mean, it's useful. And there's nothing about any kind of transcendental practice that has to do with destroying the ego.
You use the word transcendental, and I want to just mention another thing that I learned. We had this amazing conversation privately, and then we had the one here for the podcast, but I think it was the one privately where I told you that about my meditation practice that I had learned TM. Mm-hmm. And you were very diplomatic about it, and you were very diplomatic about the guy who taught me and everything, but you said very thoughtfully, try a different kind. And I just want to say for anybody listening, I took your advice, and I've meditated almost every day without the mantra and all I learned in TM. I've done some guided meditations, and it's much different. And I look forward to it, and I do it every morning for 20 minutes, and I feel like it's working. And I bring it up because I just want to let people know that if you tried before, maybe try a different way and not have so much expectation. A lot of things come into my head. They come in, they come out. Ideas, good ones and bad ones, but it's really been great. Thank you for that. You gave me permission to try a different kind.
I didn't say that because I thought that what you were doing was deficient, but there's something about breath practice where you're just paying attention to your breath that doesn't block thinking. And a lot of people think that meditation is to stop your thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, your thoughts will stop when you're dead. What meditation will really help you do is detach from your thoughts, to sequester a certain amount of your awareness in your posture and putting your attention on your breath so that you have a little perch on which to sit to watch your thoughts. So when you go to the movies, you don't think about the screen that the movie is on. But somehow you know there's a screen and you know this thing is just a projection. So you can watch anything. You can watch things blowing up. You can watch people jumping out of buildings. Well, your awareness is a screen. And all of your thoughts and stuff are being projected on the screen. And once you can watch whatever comes up with detachment, so that you're not hooked and jerked this way. And, if he says that to me again, I'll just slap the shit out of him. Well, that's being hooked by your thoughts. If you're watching that and you can say, oh, Jesus, I'm angry. Wow. What's getting me? Where in my body is that going? What's the worst part of it for me? All of a sudden, you start to take it apart. It's like one of those director's reels where they're talking about the scene.
It allows you to watch the movie that you're starring in.
That's right, without getting hooked by it.
What is your meditation practice like, and how much has it evolved? When I think about you, which I often do, I think about you probably too much. I don't know if that's possible, but I think about.
Do we want to say this on the air, Pete?
Yeah, I do. I want you to know that I think about. I start my every morning, and I think about what would Peter Coyote say a lot. What would he do? I think that's how I do it. How has your practice evolved? What's it like today? Do you float?
I meditate every day. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I skip Sundays, but I meditate for 20 or 25 minutes on days of the anniversaries of people's death that are either close to me or people who've asked me to do it. I have a card, black-rimmed card with their name on it that goes up on my altar, and I do a little service for them. But I spent a long time. I mean, I've been practicing for 45 years. So I spent a long time learning regular monastic, strict, do it this way, do it that way. And that stuff is really helpful. It helps break down your resistance. The part of you that doesn't want to do it the way everybody else is doing it, that's showing you the edge of yourself. So these forms are useful because if you didn't have them, you'd never know how you were doing. If you could meditate relaxed like this, if you could meditate with one hand on your cheek, you'd never know how your attention was going. But if I give you a posture and I say, sit like this, when you slump, straighten up. Put your hands like this. When your thumbs collapse, straighten them up. You now have a standard. It's just like the rules in a basketball game. So I've sat a lot of sessions, which are 7-day retreats where you meditate from 5:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night.
That's crazy.
Well, you have breaks. I mean, but you're doing maybe 12, 14 periods of meditating a day. And that's usually where you make the big breakthroughs. And then your daily meditation just kind of solidifies what you've got.
Can I film a little bit as you talk?
Yeah.
Because people will like that. So when do you do it? Do you do it in the morning?
I meditate first thing in the morning. I get up, I leave my dogs in bed. It's dark outside. Mm-hmm. I go out, I meditate. I do service sometimes. I work out just a little.
What's service?
Service is like memorials for people who've died. Or mostly who have died.
You go to a place and do it, or you do it privately?
I have a little zendo, a little cabin on my property, which is tatami mats and an altar and pictures of my teachers and candle and incense. And I bow in, and then I do these chants, which are ancient kind of Japanese translations of Sanskrit. No one knows exactly what they mean, but people have been doing them for thousands of years. And I do 3 or 4 of them, and then you pray that people are filled with loving kindness, that they are free from suffering, that they're happy and at peace. If they've just died, you say that they travel alone and undefended. I call on all wisdom beings, all compassion beings to guide them. And then usually 49 days after someone has died, Buddhists believe that their karma is completely fulfilled. They're just back part of all of it. And you usually put fruit and maybe sweets and stuff on your altar, and that's a happy day. So I do that, and then I get out and I water. I have a bunch of bonsai trees outside my zendo, and then I go in and love up my dogs for about 10 minutes, and then we go for a walk. The sun's just coming up.
What about suffering? I don't want to suffer. I suffered for the first time and for a long time for 3 months, and sometimes it revisits me lately a little bit more, and I don't like it.
No, I don't. I guess you don't. But
I don't know. I'm learning that I feel like I have very little resilience because I haven't had to overcome a lot of adversity. So I have to learn a lot at what I think is, I'm too old, 44, and I'm learning about resilience. I'm learning about adversity, and I'm learning about suffering, and I don't like any of it. I don't want it, but I have to go through it. I have no choice.
You remind me of that old line in the movies where Jimmy Cagney would say, how do you want it, Louis, the hard way or the easy way? Louis would say, I don't want it at all.
Yeah.
So the first noble truth of Buddha is suffering exists.
Right.
That's the first noble truth. It's not neurotic. It's not something that, is outside of human experience. It exists. There's nothing that we can do about earthquakes or, lava flows or you get run over by a truck. There's certain kinds of suffering that just come from having this body. But unnecessary suffering, the second truth, noble truth, is there's a reason for suffering. The third one is that there's an end to suffering. And the fourth is a path to avoid suffering. And the path to avoid suffering is called the Eightfold Path. And it's a whole list of kind of ways that you want to live. Right attitude, right consciousness, right practice. And if you live in this way, you will stop suffering by and large. I think as long as you are a human, you are going to have karma, we're going to have some problems. But they're not devastating. You can deal with them. And
they feel devastating. But that's because I haven't learned how to deal with them.
Well,
I haven't learned that fourth, much less the other three, well enough.
Sometimes there's nothing to do but just be there. I mean, when you sit for 11 or 12 hours, your knees are screaming. You just want to die. They're swacking you with a stick if you fall asleep. And it's like, it toughens you up. And that kind of practice is kind of like the Marines. It's for young men. It's to break down their ego. But for me, I shook for 28 years. I had spasms. And the monks on either side of me were sitting like oil paintings. It was humiliating.
While you were meditating, you shook, you mean?
Yeah, while I was trying to meditate. My body was just falling apart.
Well, I can relate because I've been shaking from anxiety.
Well,
I thought I had Parkinson's and MS and super cancer all at the same time.
Shaking when you meditate?
No. I was almost all day every day, and I went to 2 doctors, and I went to a neurologist, and he gave me a full battery of tests, and he said, you have anxiety. You're fine. And I said, well, it's really disturbing me, and I'd never had that, and it went away. Because I changed the way I was thinking. It was anxiety-based, but it was terrifying, and it was debilitating in a way. I was like, how is this happening to my body? Really feeling the nervousness physically. I made that happen.
Yeah, well, I made my shaking happen. My teacher said to me one day, he said, you ought to look at that. And I looked at it, and I realized I was trying to be too perfect. I was sitting upright. I was rigid. My posture was perfect. Everything was perfect, and my body was overstressed. And as soon as I saw it, it stopped, and I've never shaken since. So, but when you go through these things that are more than you can handle, and you just do your best, you just keep going, your intention is to get through it. Gradually you get stronger, you get more able to deal with things that sometime earlier would have floored you,
right,
finished you off.
Right.
So, and this gives you a much greater empathy for other people's suffering.
That I have.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine to be the cock of the walk. We all like that part of it. But when you've lost everything, when everything's done, that's when you really come into some kind of contact for what being human actually is. And you look around and you see the quality of suffering that exists. And the best way to get out of suffering is to help other people. That's the quickest, surest way, is take on somebody else's problems.
Really?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Have you done that a lot in your life?
I think so.
Outside of me?
No, I think so. You're nothing, man. I mean, there are people.
Yeah.
There are people that I've really stretched myself to help.
I'm sure.
And sometimes I'm going, why am I doing this? You know, and I guess the why I'm doing this is when you see them on their own feet and taking off and living a life that would have been otherwise wasted. And I do nothing. I mean, I have a friend that I've traveled the world with who is a philanthropist. He's an ex-alcoholic, ex-Republican, ex-Marine, who said he joined the Marines to save the world from people like me. And now we're joined at the hip. And he builds schools and orphanages all over the world. I had lunch in Bangkok with a woman he bought from a brothel, got her a job as an executive secretary, put all 3 of her kids in private school. I mean, gave them a life. I traveled in Tibet with a kid that he found in a basket at 3 months old, abandoned on the trail, and picked up and took down to a hospital and found somebody to raise him, paid for his education. So I look at him, I'm just a piker.
What drives him?
Suffering. He can't bear to see other people suffering. And his own good luck. He's an extremely lucky guy.
There seems to be, when you reveal that whatever your station in life is, if you reveal that you're suffering from any kind of anxiety or depression or debilitating psychological issue or ideas, and you're honest about it, I certainly have found that everybody will start coming out and telling you about their own suffering. It seems like there's so much, but that we don't talk about it very well, especially men.
Well, yeah, especially men. I mean, men are supposed to be strong. You know, your dad says, don't cry. Your coach says, shake it off. They want to teach you to be tough because it's a tough world, and it's tougher if you live in a world of individuals. If you live in a tribe, people almost never say I. It's always we. And they say, for instance, I was talking to a native friend of mine once, and I said, well, you know, I don't think there's a clearer, simpler rule than the golden rule. I don't think it's ever been surpassed. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He would like that. He said, no, but there's a problem with that. Because if you're a misogynist, if you don't like people, if you just want to be left alone, you can just be by yourself and leave them alone. I have responsibility. I have to hunt. I have to share my food with widows and orphans. I have to look after people who don't have men in their family. I have obligations to my tribe. So we live in a particularly individualistic culture where you can do your thing, you can be independent, and consequently, you have to be armored to deal in such a world. I tell people all the time, if you go to Canada, same language, same history, same religion, same cultural antecedents, different social policy. So when you walk down the street, everybody you see in the street has voted to take care of you when you're sick. Same in France, same in England, same in Italy, same in Portugal, same in Spain. Would you want to fall down on the sidewalk in New York? Right?
Right. Yeah, that's a very interesting thing to say. And when everybody around you has paid for your health care, but we are so
it makes it a we.
Yeah.
And that means your stress level is reduced. I lived in Pennsylvania, and there was a community near me that was one of those places that they studied on Earth, where people live to be 300 years old or whatever.
Yeah,
and,
the blue zones.
One of the things that they found out was it was an Italian community, and there was no stress. If you got sick, your neighbors took over, you made sure you had food brought in, made sure your kids were picked up, it was a collective, like a small town within a town. And I think that's something that we've lost for all our wealth, for all our, accoutrements and our toys and things. We don't have real bonded networks of obligations and reciprocity.
What does material wealth bring?
Well,
does it equal happiness most of the time?
No, but you suffer with more advantages.
You suffer with more advantages?
Yeah.
How's that?
Well, first of all, I think there's a big difference between wealth and riches.
Go ahead.
So riches is money, gold, status, prestige, toys, what have you. Wealth, to me, is clean air, clean food, clean water, stable community, good employment, feeling good about what you do, good relationships. That's wealth. And we've confused wealth and riches a lot. So, yes, of course, poverty is no fun, and it's no fun for anyone. It's harder to be educated. It's harder to study if you're hungry. It's hard to be insecure. It's hard not to be able to have some feeling of control over your fate. So there's a certain level of wealth that just got to have. But you don't have to have $1 billion. You don't have to have millions. You can have a lot of those things supplied by the understanding that government, the big us, is going to lay down certain basic rules. After World War II, the elites of Europe got together, and they had seen their neighbors dragged out in the street and shot. Whether they were fascist or whether they were communist or whatever they were all dragged out in the street and shot. And they got together and they said, listen, we're going to put a little ceiling on how rich we can be so that we can put a floor under how poor you can be. And there's plenty of rich people in Europe, but you don't see huge homeless encampments. If I'm in Paris and I need a doctor for 20 euros, he comes to my house. If I need a lab for another 20 euros, they come to my house and take my blood. Those are social agreements that are made because they're better for everybody. Why does the post office have to make a profit? Why does your electricity or your water have to make a profit? Why can't we just say, these are things that we want?
So what is at the root of either our or any selfishness and greed?
It comes with the human package. Buddha said that greed, hatred or anger, and delusion are the three kind of afflictions that all humans are born with. We attach to things we want, or we are averse to things, we hate, we push away, we don't link. And delusion is we fall for the fact that things are separate and isolated and not attached. Well, we fall for crazy ideas. We fall for birtherism, we fall for QAnon or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So they just come with people. And so part of our maturing has to do with learning to see through those things.
A lot of people don't evolve, don't mature during their lifetime, do they? They don't have the opportunity. They don't have the interest or curiosity. Maybe they think, a lot of people don't change. You think that's inaccurate?
I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know. I think if you live to a certain age, you can't help but learn and change. For about 11 years, I was raised by a black family. I had a black mother who just died this year. And she came to take care of me when I was 2.5. My mom had a nervous breakdown, and she was like an eggplant. And so I spent all this time with black people in this black family, and, people that white people just overlook.
Yeah. And
they don't have our mannerisms, and they're louder, and they steal each other's food when they're messing around. But a lot of wisdom there, man. A lot of depth, a lot of just accumulated wisdom from unspeakable suffering, unspeakable struggle. So, for instance, this woman, Sue, well, every black person I've ever known has always had their environment completely wired because they have to. They know everything about white people because they have to survive. We don't know anything about black culture generally as white people. So when her son was arrested, for something he didn't do, she had a friend that cleaned the judge's house. Bingo. Oh, there's somebody that'll help. There was a relationship. And I understand, believe me, I understand why black people don't want to serve white people in their homes. But I also think there was a great loss there because when I was growing up, almost every home that I knew had a person of color in it and had deep relationships between the children in those houses and the people who were actually raising them.
Well, we just need to find better ways to integrate, in our schools and our homes and our workplaces. But because when you're not exposed to people of different cultures, you're going to be maybe naturally afraid of them, unfortunately.
So the two things that we could do, one thing is I think that everybody ought to give 1 to 2 years of service when they graduate high school. Everybody.
National service of some sort, yeah.
Doesn't have to be military.
Right.
But it would throw you together with people from different regions, different classes, different cultures. And I don't know anything that democratizes people more than the military has done. It's just hard to come out of that regimen and those experiences thinking the same way. But the other thing that I really think about the most these days is that although everyone says we've got to get money out of politics, nobody really explains clearly that our entire political system is based around and organized around the acquisition of capital, private and corporate capital. That's who the Congress works for. The Congress works for the people that pays for them to be in office. The vote is just a hall pass to get to Washington. They hold focus groups. They find out what the buzzwords are. They lie. They tell us they'll fix it or they want to fix it. But they get to Congress. They get the keys to the public treasury. And then their real job begins, which is repaying their donors. So until we assume the responsibility of full federal funding of elections and say, we're going to pay for your campaign, everybody gets the same campaign. Now let's stop the hustling. Let's hear what your ideas are. And once you're in office, nobody can give you a nickel. If we have to raise your salary to be competitive, we should. But that means no lobbyists, no lunches, no tickets to basketball games, no plane junkets, and no working for any company that you supervised for 5 years. Yeah. Then we might begin to, A, attract people to Congress that are not there to get rich, and B, be able to exert control over the Congress. Because when you have 93% of the people supporting reasonable gun control, gun safety, and the Congress votes with the 7%, it tells you they're the Congress of the 7%. So the fiction that keeps being maintained is one of these great Democratic contestants is going to get in there and change this game. Look what they did to Obama. They didn't even give him his Supreme Court pick.
Right.
McConnell took $2.5 million from the Russians. Do you think he's worried about the Russians queering the election? Ted Cruz got money from the Russians. Mitch McConnell. There's a whole series of them. So they're not worried. So take the money out of the equation. And I think until we get a grassroots rebellion about that, till we start posting petitions on the internet that anybody can print, and take the basketball games and the supermarket in which you say to a candidate, we will support you, we will work for you, we will give you money if you'll swear to follow the next four things: full federal funding of elections, right, no gifts from lobbyists, blah, 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 blah. And if not, we're going to work against you.
Right. Yeah.
And if you went into an office with 100,000 names on a signature, you might catch their attention. But it will never come from Washington.
Getting back to, all right, one last question here. What do you fear? What are your fears? And when they arrive in your mind or in front of you, how do you deal with them?
Well,
do you have it every day? Do things come in that scare you, or that depress you, or that make you nervous, or are you more zen where it doesn't?
No, that's a misnomer. I mean, everybody has fear. The question is, are you going to let it stop you? Are you going to do what you're going to do afraid, or are you going to just be stopped by it? So I'm afraid of things like the end of civilization. And what I mean by that is, if global warming raises the ocean levels by 3 feet, you're going to have migrations of hundreds of millions of people that no nation state will be able to resist. And you will have the end not of life, but of civilization. Every place will be like Beirut. Every place will be like Syria. Every place will be like Iraq. That frightens me. It frightens me to know that when my granddaughter is 40, there's going to be 30% less oxygen in the air. So it's going to be like she's living at 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet, because the phytoplankton that's living in the ocean is already a third reduced. But by 2050, it's going to be too warm to produce any oxygen. And it's bigger than the Amazon. It's the biggest green matter on Earth. So yeah, these things worry me, but I can only try to affect one person at a time. I can only try to make an argument that will make you listen. I can't force you to listen. So I try to segregate my fears into things I can do something about and things that I can't.
Well, that's why I've always wanted to amplify your voice. So you're talking to hopefully thousands and if not millions of people on this podcast. And you've always been someone who people who listen to me talk to you, they loved and they learned a lot from. So thank you, as always, for another conversation today. Well, really appreciate it.
It's nice to be with you, and thanks for the soapbox.
As always, Peter Coyote. Hey, I never asked you this while we're still recording. You've been working with Ken Burns for such a long time. What's that? Does everybody ask you that question? What's that like?
Ken Burns is my reward for being a nice person, I think. I don't know. We have such fun together.
Yeah.
And
you're personal friends? You guys get along?
I think so. I mean, we get along very well.
Mm-hmm.
We don't hang out together, but when we're in the studio, there's a lot of laughing. But
he's there with you.
Oh, yeah. But, my gift is that I can read well, and I can carry the listener through complicated sentences, which is what he loves. When you really think of the amount of work that he and his people at Florentine Films have done, it's astounding.
Yeah.
When you think that the Vietnam series was 9 2-hour films, the country music series was 8 2-hour films. It takes 5 to 10 years to do these. Yeah. And so I'm flattered to be his voice. And every one that I do is like a master's degree. And,
because you're learning.
I'm learning, sure.
Yeah.
And, they bring me to New York. I'm in a nice hotel. I have a little money in my pocket. And it's a great week. Wow. I mean, fun.
I'm so glad that you're doing it. We all are. All right. That's it. Now I'll press stop.
That's it. That's all for today's episode of Stand Up. That is Peter Coyote, and I am Pete Dominick. Please consider a subscription on Patreon, patreon.com/PeteCoyote.
Pete Dominic, and subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends about the podcast. There's a billion podcasts. I hope that you will continue to listen to this one. Let me know who you want to hear, what you want to hear, and follow me on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and all the way to my home. Have a great day and send me your ideas. I love you. Goodbye.